Montana Territory, September 1876. The baby's first cry cut through the pine-thick air like a prayer in the dark. Joetta Fallow knelt in the damp earth, her dress soaked through and her hands shaking as she cradled the tiny, blood-slicked child against her chest. Her back pressed against the trunk of a towering spruce, and the sharp scent of sap mixed with the raw iron tang of birth hung thick in the air. Her horse had bolted hours ago. The storm had come fast, and now there was only her, the baby, and the endless woods. "I do not know what I am doing," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I do not know anything." A branch snapped. Joetta jerked her head toward the sound, heart hammering. She had not heard a man approach, but there he was, parting the underbrush like it was nothing. Tall, broad-shouldered. A rifle slung across his back, soaked from the rain. His hat dripped water as he stepped into the clearing, boots sinking into the mud. He paused when he saw her. His gaze dropped to the newborn in her arms, then lifted back to her face. "I am not gonna hurt you," he said gently. "Name's Nolan Judson. I'm a cowboy heading east to Bozeman. Saw smoke from your fire last night." "There is no fire," Joetta said, her voice hoarse. "There was," he replied, "flickered out by morning." She tightened her grip on the baby, her arms ached, her legs were numb. The pain from the delivery still throbbed through her, low and sharp, but she stayed upright. Nolan knelt slowly, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. "Is the baby all right?" Joetta nodded once, then blinked rapidly. "I think so. She is breathing." Nolan's eyes warmed. "That is a good start." "I do not know what I am doing," she said again, her voice cracking. "I do," he said, without hesitation. "Let me help." She stared at him, chest rising and falling, unsure if she could trust a stranger. But the baby whimpered quietly, and the wind was picking up again, cold and biting. Nolan took off his coat and held it out. "You both need warmth. There's a cabin a mile down, old trapper's place I passed yesterday, has a roof, a stove." Joetta hesitated, then nodded. "All right." Nolan moved fast but careful. He helped her stand, lifting her with a strength that made her knees buckle. He wrapped his coat around her shoulders, holding her steady with one arm while keeping the other free. The baby nestled against her chest, wrapped in her shawl, quiet but alert. He made a sled from pine branches, patted it with his saddle blanket, and eased Joetta onto it. Then he tethered the bundle to his horse and led them through the trees, every step measured. Not once did he speak unless it was to reassure her. "You are doing good," he said as she winced. "I do not feel good." "Still," he said, "you are doing it." The cabin was crooked and half swallowed by ferns, but it stood. There was dry wood inside, and Nolan made a fire while Joetta sat on a pile of old pelts, the baby in her arms. She watched him move, quiet, efficient, kind. He found a tin pot, boiled water from the creek, and brought it to her with trembling hands. "Drink," he said. She did. Later, once the baby was asleep and the storm rolled overhead, Joetta sat wrapped in a wool blanket, staring into the flames. "I came from Helena," she said softly. "My sister, she turned me away when she saw I was with child. Said I'd brought shame to the family. I ran. I thought I could make it to Crow Agency. I heard the women there might help, but I was too slow." Nolan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You are here now. That counts for something." Joetta looked down at the baby. "Her name is Fern," he smiled. "That suits her." Joetta looked up at him, eyes tired but steady. "Why are you helping me?" He met her gaze. "Because you needed it." She held that look for a long time. The next morning, Nolan stepped outside to fetch water. When he returned, Joetta was trying to stand, baby Fern tucked in a sling made from her shawl. "You should rest," he said. "I cannot stay here forever." "No," he agreed, "but a few more days will not hurt." She nodded, lips pressed tight. "I do not want to be a burden." He crossed the room in 2 strides and took her hand. "You are not." Her eyes filled, but she blinked fast. Over the next 2 days, Nolan did not leave. He cooked what little food they had, repaired the leaking roof, and kept the fire going. He never asked questions she did not want to answer, never touched her without asking, and never looked at her with pity. When Fern cried, he reached for her with surprising ease. "You have children?" Joetta asked once. "No," he said, "but I had a younger sister." Raised her after our folks died. Joetta looked at him differently after that. On the fourth day, she sat beside him on the cabin step, Fern asleep in her arms. The sun filtered through the trees, warm and golden. "I still do not know what I am doing," she murmured. Nolan turned to her, quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I do." She looked up at him. "I know how to build a roof, how to raise a child, how to keep you safe. If you let me, Joetta, I will do all of it." Her breath caught. "I am not asking for anything from you," Nolan added. "But I would be proud to stand beside you, raise Fern like she's my own." Her hand found his, fingers curling around his. She whispered, "Yes." The wind rustled the trees, and for the first time in weeks, Joetta felt still inside, not alone, not lost. Just held and safe, and starting something new. By the fifth morning, frost silvered the grass outside the cabin, and the sky above the pines had that washed-out blue that came before winter settled in for good. Joetta stood barefoot on the plank floor, watching her breath rise in the chill air, Fern bundled close to her chest in a sling Nolan had sewn from an old flour sack. Nolan was outside chopping wood. His shirt sleeves rolled past the elbow, and his movements steady, quiet. The rhythmic thud of the axe was oddly calming. She'd never known what it felt like to be looked after without conditions. It settled in her bones, strange and new. When he stepped inside again, carrying an armful of split logs, she asked, "Why Bozeman?" He set the wood down near the stove, brushing his hands on his trousers. "There's a man there owns a livery. Said if I came before snowfall, he'd give me a job. I've worked for him once before." "He's fair. You still plan to go?" she asked, her voice thin. He looked at her then, something unreadable in his face. "Not if you don't want me to." Joetta didn't answer right away. Fern stirred and she shifted her weight, rocking gently. The fire crackled low behind her. "I wouldn't stop you," she said finally, "but I don't know how to be alone again, not with her." "You ain't alone," he said. "Not now." She looked down at Fern, the baby's cheeks pink against the sling. "I've never had someone stay, not really." "I ain't someone else," Nolan said. "I'm me." She met his eyes. "I don't know what that means yet." He nodded like that was fair. Later that day, Nolan rode out with his rifle slung over his back and returned near dusk with a young doe slung across his saddle. He field-dressed it behind the cabin, quiet work, and Joetta watched from the doorway, Fern asleep against her chest. His hands were practiced and sure, no wasted movement, no unnecessary talk. She hadn't realized how much noise loneliness made until it stopped. Inside, she cleaned the table with warm water while he brought in strips of venison, wrapping them in cloth. "You ever lived anywhere more than a season?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not since I was 16. "Why, didn't have much reason to stay put," he said, setting the knife down. "Folks died, sister married, I drifted. Always figured I'd know when it was time to put roots down." Joetta folded the cloth in her hands, her fingers twitching. "And now," he looked at her long and low. "Now I think I've found it." The air between them shifted, slow and certain like the thaw after a hard frost. "I don't know what comes next," she said. Nolan stepped closer, but not too close. "We figure it out." That night the wind howled through the trees, but the cabin held. Joetta sat on the low cot with Fern curled beside her and listened to Nolan humming quietly as he carved something by lamplight. The sound was rough, tuneless, but it filled the space in a way that felt like belonging. She lay down without saying goodnight. He didn't take offense. He banked the fire, laid out his blanket by the door, and stretched out with one arm behind his head, eyes on the ceiling. Somewhere past midnight, Fern began to fuss. Joetta stirred, but before she fully sat up, Nolan was already by her side, holding out the warm, feeding cloth. "I heard her," he whispered. Joetta took it, brushing her fingers against his. "You always hear everything, only what matters." She didn't answer, but something eased in her shoulders. In the morning, she found a small carving on the edge of the table, a sprig of fern no bigger than her palm. She didn't ask when he'd done it. Instead, she touched it lightly and smiled. A hard frost came overnight, brittle white clinging to every branch and blade. Joetta stepped out early, boots crunching over the frozen moss, Fern wrapped tight against her chest. The cold stung her cheeks, but it cleared her head. She walked a few paces from the cabin, just enough to see the slope of the woods beyond. Pine needles glistened in the low sun, and the sky was the color of worn tin. Behind her, Nolan was splitting kindling near the lean-to, sleeves rolled down now, collar turned up against the wind. He kept glancing her way, not hovering but near enough to mean something. She turned toward him. "Did you always work with horses?" she asked as he stacked the wood in a neat pile. "No," he said, lifting another branch. "Started with cattle, drove a herd up from Texas when I was 17, got kicked in the ribs more than once for not paying mind." She smiled faintly. "You don't strike me as careless." "I wasn't," he said, setting the axe down. "Just stubborn, thought I could outwork anything." She shifted Fern higher, the baby warm and quiet. "What changed?" "My sister married a rancher near Fort Union. She told me to stop running like I was being chased. Said there's a difference between moving forward and running away." Joetta walked closer, her breath visible in the cold. "Would she like me?" "I think she'd see what I see," he said. "That you get back up even when no one's watching." Joetta looked down at the baby, one small hand poking out of the shawl. "I don't know what parts of me are still mine. I feel like I've been scraped down to the bone." "That just means what grows back will be stronger," he said. "You're not who you were in Helena, that's not a loss." She was quiet a moment. "What do you want with me, Nolan? Not Fern, me." He didn't flinch. "I want to share the work, the cold mornings, the quiet nights. I want to see what kind of life we could build when we're not looking over our shoulders. I don't know how to be loved without owing something," she said. "Then let's start with respect," he said, "and go from there." Joetta stepped closer, her fingers brushing against the wool of his coat. "When the snow settles, where do we go?" He looked at her, steady. "Wherever you feel safe." "I don't have a safe place." "Then we'll make one." That evening, as the shadows stretched long and the woods grew still, Nolan brought out a stack of boards he'd salvaged from the trapper's collapsed shed. He laid them beside the cabin wall, measuring the doorway with a piece of twine. "What is it?" Joetta asked, Fern asleep in her arms. "Thought I'd build a cradle," he said, not looking up. "She won't fit in that sling forever." Joetta knelt beside him, her skirt brushing the dirt. "You always make things when you care," he nodded. "Can't say it well, so I show it." She watched his hands, how they moved with purpose. "You're not what I expected." "I don't think either of us is," he said. The light faded slow, and Joetta stayed beside him while he worked, not saying much. Just being near, breathing the same cold air, letting the silence stretch without fear. When the first snowflakes drifted down, catching in her hair, she didn't pull away when his shoulder brushed hers. She leaned into it, and he didn't move, didn't speak. Just stayed there, steady as the earth beneath them. The cradle stood finished by the hearth, its edges planed smooth, the wood rubbed with bare fat until it shone like honey in the firelight. Joetta ran her fingers along its rim that evening. Fern nestled inside, her breath slow and even. The baby's tiny fists twitched in sleep, lashes trembling against her cheeks. Joetta turned. "You carved her name underneath." Nolan was near the stove, scraping what meat was left from the deer bones into a pot for stew. He didn't glance back. "Seemed right," he said. "Didn't think she'd mind." "She won't," Joetta said quietly. "But I think I do." He paused, spoon hovering above the pot. "You'd rather I hadn't?" "No," she said, voice roughened by something she hadn't expected to feel. "I mean, it's just—" No one's ever done something like that for her without being asked. He stirred the pot once, then set the spoon down. "I didn't do it to earn anything." "I know," she said, folding her arms over her middle. "That's why it matters." Outside, the wind had quieted and the snow fell soft now, more dust than storm. Nolan crossed the room slow, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Do you want to stay here?" he asked. "Through winter, I mean. We've got wood enough, shelters holding." "I could trap small game." Joetta looked down at Fern, her hand resting lightly on the baby's chest. "I don't know what's out there waiting for us, but I know what's in here." That's the first time I've ever been able to say that. Nolan lowered himself to the floor beside the cradle, back resting against the wall. "I've wintered in worse places. You sure you want to be tied to one spot? She asked. I'd rather be tied to a person, he said. If she's willing. Joetta didn't answer right away. The fire popped and Fern shifted in her sleep, her mouth working softly as though dreaming of milk. I used to think men only stayed long enough to leave something behind, Joetta said. A wound, a mouth to feed, a story you couldn't tell in polite company. I've heard enough of those stories to know I didn't want to be one, Nolan said. She turned to him. You haven't asked about her father. I figured if you wanted me to know, you'd say. Joetta reached over and adjusted the blanket around Fern's feet. He was a preacher's son, said all the right things, wore all the right clothes. When I told him, he said I'd imagined the whole thing. That I'd been warned not to tempt him. Nolan's jaw tensed, but he didn't speak. I tried to tell my sister. She said I'd made my bed, I wasn't welcome in hers. I'm glad you left them behind, he said finally. Joetta looked back at him. I didn't have much choice. You do now. She held his gaze and something eased in her shoulders. If we stay and spring comes, what then? We plant something, Nolan said. Even if it's just beans and squash, we fix the roof proper. Maybe build a second room. And after that, we see what grows. Joetta leaned back against the wall beside him, their shoulders brushing. I haven't thought that far ahead in a long time. Nolan reached up, gently took her hand, and let their fingers rest together on the packed earth floor. Then we'll take it one season at a time. Joetta looked down at their joined hands, then at the cradle. I could learn to trust that. You already are, he said. They sat long into the night, listening to the snow whisper against the roof, Fern's soft breaths the only sound between them. And in the quiet, Joetta knew something had changed, not with a rush or a vow, but in the way Nolan stayed close without asking, and how her heart no longer braced for a door to close. She didn't know how to name it yet, but she understood it was hers, and it was enough. By January, the snow lay deep enough to hush the forest, burying fallen branches and low shrubs alike, the world reduced to white and shadow and breath. The days passed slow, marked by the rhythm of necessity firewood. Stu, mending, and Joetta found that life could be measured in small, steady kindnesses. Nolan never treated her gentleness as weakness or Fern's presence as burden. When he handed her a bowl or opened the door, it wasn't out of duty. It was out of care. One morning, after a long night of wind and dry snow, she stood in the doorway watching the sun break through the treetops, pale and faintly gold. Nolan had gone to check the trapline early, snowshoes strapped to his boots and a quiet promise to return before midday. Fern stirred against her chest and Joetta shifted her weight to soothe her. The cradle sat empty by the hearth and the fire had sunk to embers. She turned from the door and wrapped the baby tighter, rocking her gently. You'll never have to ask twice for love, she murmured. Not from him. Not from me. She didn't hear Nolan return until his boots thudded softly on the porch planks. He stepped through the door, brushing snow from his shoulders, a small hair in one hand and a leather pouch in the other. Got lucky, he said, holding up the rabbit. Joetta nodded toward the pouch. What's that? He set it on the table and untied the drawstring. Found it tucked under a tree root. Looked like someone buried it a long while back. There's a bit of silver in there, a ring and some coins. Joetta stepped closer, eyeing the tarnished band. You think it belonged to the trapper? Maybe, he said, lifting the ring between his fingers. Maybe someone else passed through and left it behind. She took the ring, turning it over. It was simple, no stone, just a plain silver band worn smooth by time. She slipped it on her smallest finger where it sat loose and looked up at him. I never thought I'd wear one, she said. Not after everything. Nolan met her gaze. I never thought I'd give one. But if you want it, it's yours. Joetta looked down at Fern, who was now blinking up at her, newly awake. Do you want to be her father, not just in practice, in truth? I already am, he said. All that's left is saying it out loud. Joetta swallowed hard. Then say it. He stepped forward, close enough that she could smell the cold in his coat, the cedar smoke in his hair. I want to be your husband, Joetta. I want to raise Fern as our own. I want to build this life with you, not for a season, for all of it. Her throat tightened. I don't have much to give. You've given more than anyone ever has, he said. You gave me a place to belong. She removed the ring from her finger, held it out to him. Then you put it on me, proper. He took it, hand steady, and slid the band onto her ring finger where it fit snug. She reached up, her hand brushing his jaw, rough with stubble, and pulled him toward her. He didn't hesitate. His mouth found hers, warm and certain. The kiss was slow, deepened by everything they hadn't said but had built between them. When they parted, Joetta rested her forehead to his. We'll do it our way, no preacher, just us. And Fern, he said, and Fern. They married 2 days later beneath the clearing sky, standing in the snow just outside the cabin, their boots crunching in silence. Nolan had whittled a second ring from a strip of pine, soaked in beeswax to keep it from cracking. Joetta wore it with the silver one, stacked together like they'd always belonged. He spoke his vow soft and firm, looking only at her. I will stand beside you. Through winter, through hardship, through whatever comes, she answered with her own. I will make a home with you. Where Fern grows, where we grow, I will not leave. Fern gurgled in her sling, as if agreeing, and Joetta smiled through the tears that had welled in her eyes. They sealed it with a kiss, snowflakes clinging to their hair and lashes, and Nolan held her close, hands spread over her back, anchoring her in the quiet, sacred moment. By March, the snow began to retreat in patches, revealing the earth beneath, dark and rich. Nolan dug a narrow trench beside the cabin and planted seeds from a small paper packet he'd found in the trapper's loft: beans, wild mustard, and a few sprouting potatoes. Joetta mended Fern's swaddles and stitched 2 small shirts from an old flannel shift, humming softly as she worked. They added a second cot, then pushed the 2 together, building 1 bed wide enough for 3. Nolan carved a low stool for Joetta to sit on while feeding Fern, and Joetta taught him how to stitch a seam when his shirt tore across the shoulder. One afternoon, she paused in her sewing to watch Nolan toss Fern into the air just high enough to make her squeal, his laughter warm and unguarded. He caught her easily, cradling her against his chest, his nose brushing her cheek. You're softening, Joetta said from the doorway. He looked up at her, his smile easy, only for the right girls. Joetta stepped down into the yard, her hand brushing the edge of the doorframe. We won't always have quiet seasons. I know, he said. But we'll have each other. She reached for his hand and he took it. Fern nestled between them. They stood like that as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the thawing ground, their fingers laced, their hearts steady. And in that moment, Joetta knew that every road she'd once feared had led her here, not to safety, not to ease, but to something better. To a man who stayed, to a child who'd never be unwanted, to a home built not from escape but from choosing each other again and again. They never left the cabin that spring or the summer that followed. They laid a garden, raised hens. By the next autumn, Fern was walking, her steps wobbly but persistent, her laughter filling the spaces where silence used to live. And every night, Nolan pulled Joetta close beside the fire, her head on his shoulder, Fern asleep in the cradle he'd built with his own hands. The world beyond the trees might shift and change, but within those walls, love held fast. Earned, quiet, unshakable forever.